I love I love the impact of history on modern life and contemporary politics. The scene you refer to when Benjamin Franklin met with the King of Denmark, who was traveling incognito, by the way, in London, and I can't remember the year, but late 1700s, actually happened. And that's the only, Benjamin Franklin records in his diary that is the only time he ever was received by a monarch when he met the King of Denmark. And I've got three or four scenes like that, like a scene with Teddy Roosevelt when he visited Copenhagen and had a private audience with the king and the crown prince. That happened. Now, of course, I'm imagining what happened during that conversation, but people who've read the book have commented to me how much they learned about history by reading the book. And if that's the case, I think it's a positive impact.
Hello, I'm Zeb Links, editor at Aspects of History. The murder of a Danish prince becomes a tale of espionage, diplomacy, and ancient secrets as American and Irish diplomats become caught up in a struggle involving the Crown of Denmark, a 1,000-year-old mystery, and Vladimir Putin's schemes for a resurgent Russian empire. Reign of Secrets is the first novel in the Wit Ransom thriller series, and on today's episode we are joined by its author, Ambassador James P. Cain, whose remarkable career from politics, law, and professional sport to the world of international diplomacy as US ambassador to Denmark inspired the gripping narrative. His experiences at the heart of American politics and transatlantic affairs, paired with a serious engagement with European history, saw him discuss the enduring significance of the monarchies, ways in which historical narratives are being manipulated for geopolitical ends, and the changing relationship between America and Europe. Next week on the Aspects of History podcast, Gautam Hazarika talks to Phil Craig on the experiences of Indian POWs across Southeast Asia in World War II, from the difficult choice of joining the Indian National Army to escape attempts, the impact on families, and the ways their stories are still remembered. But for now, settle in and enjoy my conversation on Reign of Secrets with Ambassador Jim Cain. Jim, great to have you on. We're here to discuss your high-octane historical thriller, Reign of Secrets. It's a gripping read set amid Copenhagen palaces and plenty of other European locations and based on your time as a diplomat in Denmark. But thank you first for joining us on the Aspects of History podcast. Fair to say, and I think it's a good place to start, I think, you've had an extraordinary career spanning politics, law, professional sport, diplomacy. What was it that drew you first towards public life, and did you ever imagine that it would eventually lead to becoming US ambassador to Denmark between 2005 and 2009?
No, I didn't, Zeb. I started life and working for President Reagan when I was young. I took a year off of college to work for him in 1979, 1980. So I sort of had politics in my blood, but I went the route of law and then business and then professional sports. I ran the Carolina Hurricanes NHL hockey team here for a few years in North Carolina. Life is a series of serendipitous trajectories at time. I met George Bush when he was campaigning for president. I was not involved in his campaign. I was trying to sell ice hockey tickets. But when I retired from the hockey scene, I got a call from the White House, and he asked me to get involved back in the campaign mode, and then sent me to Denmark as U.S. ambassador in 2005. So no, I did not plan that as my career trajectory, but the chance to serve your country in a bilateral position, particularly in a European capital, is an extraordinary opportunity and one that I really did relish.
And so, yeah, you touched upon there on working on those kind of early Reagan campaigns in the late 70s. What did those formative experiences teach you about American politics and leadership that kind of have stayed with you throughout this career?
I think, from Reagan's perspective, I think I really admire the way and learn from him the way that in diplomatic circles it's right to treat people and give them hope and courage and encourage collaboration. I like that lesson. I think that lesson has been lost a bit in current political life. But I think the chance to be active in politics at a young age, to learn how to debate, learn how to negotiate, learn how to lead, watch effective leaders like Reagan and others, was a formative experience in my life. And it gave me the skills that helped me to establish the skills I needed to succeed, whether it's law, business, professional sports, or diplomacy. And now as an author, which I didn't expect to be either, by the way, but getting out there and getting active, whether it's a civic life, social life, philanthropic life, business life, but getting out of your bedroom, getting out of your office, getting involved is really the key, I think, to not just to happiness and success, but impact. And I think we all want to make an impact for our kids and grandkids before we pass away. And that's what I hopefully am able to do before I move on and pass on to my grandchildren.
Well, I mean, the book definitely kind of is testimony to that impact. But what does the life of an ambassador at those very highest levels of diplomacy actually look like behind the scenes? Hopefully not quite as perilous as some of the events depicted in Reign of Secrets. But how much of that diplomatic life comes directly from your own experience working in Copenhagen?
Yeah, there's a lot of interest these days in the life of a diplomat. A lot of that's been fueled by recent movies and TV shows here in the U.S. The TV series Diplomat is very popular. I think it's hit the rankings over there in England too. And unlike the ambassador in London in the show The Diplomat, I wasn't shot at or targeted every week like she is in the TV show. But it's an exciting life, and particularly when you are in a country like the UK, like France, like Denmark, that is doing important things in the world. So the book Reign of Secrets, it's fiction, it's historical fiction, and billed as a diplomatic thriller. But many of the scenes in the book, including the opening scene, which is really fascinating from a historical perspective, came from our life and our time in Denmark. And if a reader or listener is interested in what the real life of a U.S. ambassador is like, Reign of Secrets will give them a good idea of the practical lifestyle an ambassador leads in modern times.
Yeah, so you're referring to that kind of reburial of Empress Dagmar or Maria Feodorovna, which you were there at, right? That was right. Quite early at your time.
And that's really when the idea of this plot line, this storyline came to me, Zeb. This was 2007, and we'd been in Denmark about a year and a half, and were invited to the Royal Cathedral just outside Copenhagen in Roskilde for the reburial service of Empress Maria Feodorovna, who most of your listeners have not heard of. She was born Princess Dagmar, youngest daughter of Christian IX, was married off to Alexander III, who was Tsar of Russia, so she's Empress of Russia. She's the mother of Nicholas II, the last Tsar of Russia, so she's the grandmother of Anastasia and the one for whom Fabergé made all the eggs. So she escapes when the Bolsheviks invaded in 1917. She escapes to Crimea with her eggs, hides them in the Crimean Sea. Her nephew, who by this time is the King of England, helps her to escape Crimea, brings her to London, gets her back to Copenhagen, where she dies in 1928, never believing, by the way, that her son, Nicholas, and his family were murdered. She thought they were going to come back and that Nicholas would regain the throne. And I'm sitting there in the cathedral with all the royal families of Europe are represented in the cathedral because Vladimir Putin has written a letter to the Queen of Denmark asking for the return of the remains of this long dead empress, 80 years dead. And they're going to take her body up and take it out and take it to St. Petersburg. And it dawns on me, why does Putin want this body back? This is 20 years ago, by the way. It dawns on me, Putin's trying to bring the Russian Empire back. And there's something key to this long dead empress. It also dawned on me, by the way, and that service is in Danish, so I had plenty of time to think because I couldn't understand the Danish language. The Danish royal family has been on the throne for 1,000 years, same family, while so many other families in Europe have been, either terminated or bloodlines mixed. Why has that family been on the throne for 1,000 years, whereas the British royal family, for example, has been on the throne for 300 or 400 years? There's a secret, and Vladimir Putin's out to find it. Everything I just said was true except for that last phrase. That's the fictional part. But it sort of makes for a good storyline.
Yeah, no, I totally agreed. Totally agreed. You say it hinges on this kind of ancient secret. And I mean, was it being in Copenhagen and being kind of in Europe? And obviously you've just mentioned the Danish monarchy. When did you feel that this was an interesting vehicle for a kind of geopolitical thriller?
Well, two things occurred. I think one was my fascination with the role of the monarchy, the role the monarchy plays in modern life, because in America, we're fascinated by monarchies. I mean, just look at how we turned out for King Charles, even though there's been this, tension, of course, in America between the love for Diana and her husband, et cetera, et cetera. But we do love the monarchy. Now, we're happy not to have a monarchy. We fought a war over it 250 years ago exactly, but we're fascinated by the monarchy. And so that, the idea of sort of the role of the monarchy played some role in the impetus for this book. But the other thing was when Putin invaded Crimea, when he invaded Crimea initially, 2014, that gave me some impetus to write the book. But then when he invaded Ukraine and it became clear to the world that he had this empirical desire to return the empire, that's when I said to myself, I've got to get this book out, because there's validity now to what I suspected 20 years ago. Everybody knows it's the truth now. So I got to get this book out. And so that's really why I started writing pretty frantically. And we had a family tragedy that took me away from my business for a while and gave me a reason to write as therapy, sort of to get away from reality. And so I really started ferociously writing about 2016, 2017, and am happy that it's finally out, and it's done so well in the first couple of months it's been out.
Yeah, we might touch on that later. But as you say, the book's arch-villain, a certain Vladimir Putin, and his ambition to resurrect a kind of version of the Russian Empire, it looms large over the story. How do you understand, and can you understand, his view of history? I mean, his own, Russia's, Europe's, and how significant is that role of history in grasping what Russia's foreign policy is today?
Yeah, that's a pretty complicated question, Zeb. You sound like you're part of the congressional panel on a Senate confirmation hearing or something. The book itself doesn't get too deeply into global geopolitics. It's about good and evil. It's about right and wrong. Vladimir Putin is the bad guy in the book, right? I mean, if you're a fan of Vladimir Putin, which many on the left and right, even in America, are these days, you may not like the book, because the book basically has a message, and it's a message about the role America needs to play on the global stage. The U.S. ambassador is a character in the book, but he's not the hero. The hero are, his attaché and his counterpart, the Irish attaché, who of course is a female. But the book does deal with, I think, a very present fact that Putin is leveraging, and that is that the world, and particularly Europe, has grown less confident in America as a trusted ally. That's very much the theme of the book. Can America be trusted these days? Putin's in this book, as I think he's doing in real life, is trying to cast doubt about that in the world, and he's aided, of course, and abetted by his friends in Beijing. Although the book does not deal again with contemporary geopolitics in a direct sense, indirectly, it's very much a part of the theme of the book, and it's a bit of a warning, if you would, to the West that America, and then I'm speaking as an American here, Zeb. I know you're recording from London, but Americans need to understand how critical and how valuable our role in the world is. And spending 4 years outside of America, looking at America in a rearview mirror from Europe, as I did as a diplomat, I think really helped to convince me more than ever of the critical role for aggressive, forward-leaning, American engagement on a global stage. And I worry that we're losing that conviction and that direction.
Yeah, I mean, you're teeing me up very nicely with these questions. But I mean, how would you remark upon the state of the US-European relationship today during this period of kind of uncertainty? Do you think it can be salvaged if it's been damaged?
Yeah, look, I think our relationship, goes back well, let's just take it from the Second World War. I learned spending 4 years in Scandinavia just how much of Western Europe looks transatlantic relationship, and I'm including the UK in this, across the UK to the US for their security, for their freedom, for the growth and prosperity that we know in the West. And those bonds that establish that relationship, go back before 1944, 45, but they have been so strengthened in the last 80 years that it takes more than, 3 or 4 years to undo that. But there can be a lot of damage done and feelings hurt. For example, I come from Denmark. I mean, I come from the Denmark diplomatic capacity. The people in Denmark are really upset at America, primarily because of President Trump's messaging when it comes to Greenland. Mm-hmm. And that's a completely separate topic. We can discuss it if you want to. But even if there are strategic, valid reasons why America might need to be more active in Greenland, and there are, when you insult a people in a nation the way that they've been insulted. Look, I attended funerals of, 7 or 8 Danish soldiers who died fighting beside our soldiers in Afghanistan and Iraq. I know how aggressively our allies in the UK and Denmark and other places fought with us. So they're great allies. And to imply that they aren't, and to imply that they've, retreated to the rear or didn't stand beside us is categorically, historically wrong. And it really insults the nation in a way that's takes time to heal. I think to the extent that, the anger of the Europeans and the Danes in this case are personified in President Trump, like it or not. I'm not saying this. I mean, I'm a Reagan Republican. Define that how you want. But I am confident that, knowing America as I do, that we can repair the relations, because it's too important as we look at the critical threats that are emerging from. I mean, look at the Middle East, look at Iran, look at China, look at Russia, look at Africa, look what China's doing in Africa and Latin America. America cannot fight this battle alone. It's only we can fight. The West has to be cohesive, collaborative, to fight the future battles together. And I'm confident that leading heads in America and Europe see it that way, see it the same way.
Here at Aspects of History, we aim to bring you the very best in history writing, from leading historians, best-selling authors, and fresh voices, exploring all corners of the past from every angle, through articles, interviews, reviews, and podcasts like this one. We are marking an exciting new chapter for our Substack offering, starting this month. Subscribe for free to receive a curated editorial newsletter sent every Wednesday, featuring the latest articles free to read on our site, podcast highlights, and recommendations from the archive. Or, even better, become a yearly subscriber on Substack to receive both annual magazine subscription and an exclusive magazine feature each Saturday, with original interviews, essays, and author contributions delivered straight to your inbox that you won't find on our site. Over the next couple of months, you will receive features and interviews from best-selling historians, names such as Simon Sebag Montefiore, Anthony Selden, Jonathan Fennell, and Paul Mason discussing their recent releases. Visit aspectsofhistory.com or search for Aspects of History on Substack to subscribe today. I think, one of the great successes of the book is that it raises these questions. And another is the way you move between contemporary events and the action, and then these frequent flashbacks into history, and, kind of meetings between a certain Benjamin Franklin and the Crown Prince does show that how far that relationship does go back. But why did you feel it important to bring those episodes of the past directly into the narrative rather than kind of simply contextualizing them in the background?
Well, I'm a big fan of history. I love the impact of history on modern life and contemporary politics. The scene you refer to when Benjamin Franklin met with the King of Denmark, who was traveling incognito, by the way, in London, and I can't remember the year, but late 1700s. actually happened. And that's the only, Benjamin Franklin records in his diary that is the only time he ever was received by a monarch, when he met the king of Denmark. And I've got 3 or 4 scenes like that, like a scene with Teddy Roosevelt when he visited Copenhagen and had a private audience with the king and the crown prince. That happened. Now, of course, I'm imagining what happened during that conversation. But people who've read the book, Zeb, have commented to me how much they learned about history by reading the book. And if that's the case, I think it's a positive impact. Although, of course, I've imagined a lot of content of conversations and imagined some scenes as part of the 13 historical flashbacks, you might say, or retrospectives that are present in the book. But I like that device, the device of going back and have historical flashbacks. I've seen it in a few other historical fiction novels that I like, and so I decided to employ that. And I think it brings an edge of historical fascination to the book.
I mean, it really comes across how rooted, in fact, those historical episodes are. But how much of a challenge do you find it to make that leap from the research and your expertise and the evidence into fiction? Has that been a kind of learning curve?
It's been a great learning curve, and took a lot of research. And I found a lot of interesting, coincidences like that meeting with Ben Franklin and the King of Denmark. And there are others in the book, but of course I completely imagined some of the very early scenes going back to the Vikings and even back 2,000 years ago. But it's interesting how often history repeats itself, and what a small world it really is. And when you talk about the rarefied air of global leadership, how many intersections there are among the leaders of the world. And so finding coincidences that made their way into the 13 historical episodes in the book, it wasn't easy, but I was really happy that it came together the way it did. The book starts out with me. I had to apologize to the Crown Prince because I killed off his younger brother in the opening scene of the book. And so, they're who's very much still alive, by the way. And the names have been changed to protect the guilty and the innocent. But there's obviously a lot of imagining in this historical fiction book of mine.
Yeah, so let's dig into your protagonist, who's Colonel Whit Ransom. He's very much a kind of veteran outsider operating within a diplomatic world, as likable a character as he is flawed. Do you see there is a tension between military force and diplomacy, and how do you see those two traditions working together, especially now in 2026?
Yeah, that's a great question, Zeb. I don't know that I've even been asked that question before, but historically, this is the U.S. and probably true in most Western countries. The diplomatic corps and the military leadership didn't always get along. Here, we call it's a kind of tension between C Street, which is where the State Department is in Washington, and the Pentagon. It's like oil and water. That's a phrase we use here. Oil and water don't mix. Sort of like over here, our FBI and our CIA sort of historically never got along. Part of the problem with 9/11, they didn't share information, right? And so in the book, you see Whit Ransom has made this transition from the battlefield, where he was injured in a helicopter crash before the fight really started, and he's in a role at the Pentagon. He gets discovered, if you would, by this ambassador in waiting, Conrad, who selects him, asks him after a briefing to come work with him in Copenhagen. So he sort of reluctantly makes the switch. He was asked to do it by the president and the ambassador, and you can see in the book, because he comes in from the outside, the tension between the sort of official, the career State Department diplomats at the embassy and the outsider, this sort of politically appointed ambassador and his outsider attaché who didn't come up through the ranks. And that's very much an existing tension. I was a political appointee. In our system, which is very controversial, by the way, most ambassadors are career foreign service diplomats. The way you get to be an ambassador in America is one of two ways. You either spend your entire career in the Foreign Service hoping you might become an ambassador one day, or, you're selected by the president from outside the State Department, and sent to, what he or she considers one of the really important countries of the day. And that's how I was selected. So I was not a career ambassador. I was an outside political appointee. And in that role, you're seen as differently than a permanent, a professional career Foreign Service officer. And I think that tension comes through in the book between the protagonist, Whit Ransom, and the ambassador's deputy. You call them the DCM, who is a main character in the book and has her own challenges and flaws like Whit Ransom does. But ultimately, I won't give away the plot line, but ultimately there's harmony at the end of the story.
Intriguing names amid the kind of cast of characters, whether it's politicians, business leaders, and they kind of sometimes come under the guise of villains. Were any of them consciously inspired by people you encountered during your career? And would you agree that the kind of reality and variety of the diplomatic world provides these characters kind of fully formed?
Look, they are all, every character in my book is informed, inspired, patterned by, based on somebody I knew in real life through my diplomatic service. This quote may not be original with me, but I've heard it before. I've said it before. From the theater of politics, the richest tales of fiction emerge. And every character in the book, from the villain, the villain's like, this minister of culture in the book, to the bodyguards of the ambassador. And, they're also heroes. They call them a PET, which is like our Secret Service in Denmark. They all are based on, characters in life. There are two ambassadors in the book who have primary roles, one good, one bad. I'm not talking about the U.S. ambassador. They're based on real characters. The spy within the royal family, that's based on a real character. The mother-in-law is to the crown prince, the mother of the crown princess, very much based on a real character, and she knows exactly who she is. And she's a very prominent author in her own right, by the way. So, I did try my best not to offend anyone, and the names have been changed, of course, but everybody is based on somebody we knew back in our time in Denmark.
And kind of on the personal side of it, I mean, you did touch on it earlier, but the book explores kind of power, resilience, moral courage. Can we kind of dig a little bit into that experience, the loss of your son-in-law in the 2016 ISIS attack on Brussels Airport, Alexander? And I mean, how that inevitably imprints itself on the narrative and adds an emotional substance to the novel.
Yeah. So, I had, and I don't know whether your listeners would know this in advance or not, but, I'd spent 4 years every morning, every weekday morning, I'd start my day with reading the threat brief, the same threat brief that the president read in the White House every morning. Mine was smaller than his. Mine was focused more on Europe and the threats that might affect Scandinavia. But, I had never met anybody really affected by terrorism. I didn't really know anybody in 9/11. We all were affected by it, but I didn't have any personal connection. But then in the most horrid set of unfortunate circumstances, our son-in-law, Alexander, and his sister, Sasha, were both killed in the Brussels ISIS attack of March of 2016. He and his sister were flying back to New York from Brussels. Their parents lived over there in the Netherlands, and they were the first two targeted and killed among two bombs that went off in the airport, and one went off in the train station in Molenbeek. But that experience, which was horrible, and it's hard to even think about nowadays, was, of course, so devastating for our daughter, losing her husband and sister-in-law, that I basically had to disengage from my business life and focus on our daughter, trying to get her back to a path to hope and happiness. And writing became my therapy, my escape from reality. And that's really, Zeb, when I started seriously writing this novel, again, as I had said earlier, the plot came to me, 8 or 9 years prior, 2007, but we're talking about 2016, which is when I really started writing this. I think very much the presence, the plot doesn't deal with ISIS. It does in a minor way. That would have been too difficult, I think, for me emotionally to take that on as a direct, subject in the fiction book. But the book's dedicated to Alex, and the book is very much a message about the fight of good versus evil and the importance, as I said earlier, of all of us in the West and those who are our allies and adjacent allies, continuing to be strong and united in this fight against evil, because it's there. It's not going away. We see it everywhere in the world today, in America, in the UK, and we've got to stand up to it together.
It does capture that extremely well. The book asks kind of what happens when these historical narratives become weapons. Do you think that perceived control of the kind of past rhetoric, past narratives, and the way that people, leaders, nations memorialize it and reinterpret it, is that still underestimated in geopolitics today, do you think?
Oh, yeah, I definitely do. I think, look at how Putin has convinced much of the world that, Ukraine really belongs to Russia, in part because there's so many Russians in Ukraine. Well, many of those have been, sent there, pushed there, prodded there over the last 20 years by Putin so he can make this argument. I think very much the narrative is important. You can look at what's happening in Iran today. The regime in Iran, which I think very much does not represent the people of Iran, has this narrative that they alone are enlightened and they alone have the keys to their kingdom, and they alone have the right to control that region. They are a very difficult, tough enemy, and many of our allies, including America, are learning that lesson the hard way right now.
Indeed. What's your hope for readers of Reign and Secrets to take away beyond the gripping plot? Is there a kind of specific idea, concept that you'd kind of urge them to keep in mind after they've finished the book?
I think it is that, and again, my audience, my readership is not directed at the American audience, but it's directed at the Western audience. It is that I think the West has to stay united, that these threats like Putin's desire to return the empire, which is very much the genre of this first book in the trilogy, that we have to confront this reality. We have to speak about it. We have to fight it, whether it's in the halls of our respective legislators or in the halls of our multilateral institutions, like NATO or the United Nations or wherever it may be. And as a people, we've got to be willing to suffer the slings and arrows of opposition to what often in many cases, in America, the mainstream media may not necessarily like that direction. And I'm not talking politics, I'm not talking local politics or national politics. I'm talking about the world standing up to tyrants, to oligarchs, to autocrats, to the Vladimir Putins of the world, and the Xi Jinpings of the world and the Ayatollahs of the world, even though in the eyes of some people, they're doing good things for their people. I don't think they are. Long term, they aren't. But the message of the book is, in the West, we have to stand united against that kind of threat, that kind of evil, wherever that tyrant raises his or her ugly head.
And so are we due to re-encounter Whit Ransom in the near future? What's in the pipeline, writing-wise?
Yes, I've been working on the sequel. I build this as a trilogy, sort of following Whit Ransom through his career, kind of like Tom Clancy when he wrote the books about Jack Ryan. The publisher was pretty excited that Reign of Secrets sold so well out of the chute. And he said, okay, we got to get that second book out now. He said, remind me how long it took you to write the first one. I said, 20 years. But I'm working on the second one. And Whit Ransom is he's certainly a predominant character in the book. The scenes will be different. The scenes in the new book will take place mainly in Istanbul and London, and of course Copenhagen. Whereas in Reign of Secrets, it was primarily Rome Copenhagen and Dublin. So it's, people say they learn a lot about traveling these cities in this book. Fortunately, I have to go to these places to really, dig in and write the right story. So I expect to see you in London soon, Zeb, as I finish out the storyline of my sequel to Reign of Secrets.
Definitely. Well, Jim, thanks again for coming on and taking us through the book and a fascinating career of yours. So Reign of Secrets is available to buy on Amazon. We'll put the links in the description, so do have a browse. Great to chat, Jim. Yeah, look forward to London and the next time.
Thank you so much, Zeb.
Thanks so much for listening. Links are in the show notes. Please share with friends and family and keep your eyes peeled for new episodes. And if you want to get in touch, you can through X or email history@aspectsofhistory.com. But until then, thank you and good night.